Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another book review. So today I'm talking about A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. I just finished this book and I wasn't sure what to expect when I first started reading this. The synopsis is pretty vague on the back, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned that in my TBR video that included this book. So I really didn't know what this book was going to be about. All I knew was that it was about historical fiction and someone was put on house arrest in one of the most famous hotels in the world, and probably the most famous hotel in Russia, the Metropole. But I have to say that after reading this, this is going in probably my top 10 favorite books of all time. I was very shocked on how much I really enjoyed this book. The last day I read like 150 pages straight through, and this is like this is a 450 page book. So I read quite a bit of it. I usually don't read over 100 pages in one day of any book, but this one was just like, it sucked me in so much that I couldn't let it go, and I just kept reading and reading and reading. I read it pretty much the whole day. On the final day I read it, I just could not stop. It's such an amazing book, and it's got pretty much everything that would make a great novel. It's got like history and love, loss, romance, friendship. It's got pretty much everything that you can imagine. I can't recommend this book enough. I really don't freak out this much over most books. I usually enjoy books I read because I'm pretty decent at picking ones that I will like. But this one really like blew me away. I highly recommend you read it, but I'm going to get into the on the very last section of this video, I will talk about who should specifically read it. But I'm just saying now, if you want to stop this video and go buy this book or start reading this book, I would not blame you one bit, because I cannot get over how awesome this book is. I would say it's an instant classic. I don't really like recommending books to be read in like high school. I don't really like required reading for middle schoolers or high schoolers or elementary school kids or anybody, because a lot of books, when you read them at that point, you don't really like them. For example, if we could talk about like To Kill a Mockingbird, I can't tell you how good that book is because I can hardly remember anything about it, but I did read it in high school. It just the fact of me being forced to read it and not reading it on my own, it just kind of ruined it for me. But I've heard people like my age say like it's one of their favorite books, so I can't really speak on it because I was forced to read it in high school. Like, it was part of the curriculum. Maybe I'll read it again in the future, but at this time, I'm just like not really interested in it. But if someone like sat me down and said, okay, we need you to pick some books to be read as part of a curriculum, this would probably be like my number one pick. It just has like everything you can imagine, and it teaches you so much, and there's just so many emotions that go on through the course of the story. But let me go ahead and like give you a little background on what this book's about. So I read the synopsis in my TBR video, so I'm not going to read it verbatim here. I will just tell you like a general overview. So there's this guy named Count Rostov. He is an aristocrat, and during the revolution that happened in the 1920s, he basically gets put on house arrest. And house arrest for him is in the Metropole Hotel. So throughout the story, it goes over the course of decades. He makes friendships, he talks to people, he basically lives his life in the Metropole. And that's really all I can tell you. And I know that's very vague. That's basically even more vague than what the back gives you. But that's all I can tell you without giving too much away. You just have to experience the story and life in his shoes by reading the book. But like I said before, I'm going to tell you who should actually read it in the very end. So what I really liked about this book, though, is that it's very beautifully written, and that is also on the back. Many newspapers and journals say stuff like delightful, beautiful, and that's exactly true. It's not so beautifully written that the prose is hard to follow, because I've read some books that has beautiful prose, but it's hard to like follow the story, and you have to reread sentences all the time. That's not true with this book. It's very beautifully written. It's not dull at all, but it's very easy to follow too. I never really had to like reread a paragraph or anything like I have with some books that have like prose that just keeps going on, and it's like trying to be beautiful, but by being beautiful, you can't even follow the story. And then also, like, I learned a lot in this book. I didn't know too much about Russian history or what happened during the revolution in the 1920s, but I learned so many things. One example is a form of punishment that the Russian government would give, which is called -6ing. And it's basically banishing people from the 6 largest cities in the Soviet Union. So stuff like obviously Moscow and, the 6 largest cities, basically. I'm not going to name, I can't even think of the 6 largest cities. But yeah, so if you were like an enemy of the state or something, you could be banished from the 6 largest cities and have to only live in the countryside. So I didn't know anything about that. I had never heard of that ever. So that was just one thing I learned in here. So if you're interested in history at all, or Russian history specifically, then that's something that you could keep in mind. Also, there's just a lot of human connection in this book. That should be obvious, though. He makes friends with a lot of the people that worked at the Metropole and the hotel goers, the people that are staying at the Metropole. And there's just a lot going on, but there's so many human connections, I can't really even explain them all. But it just really feels like a real story where you're really living his life. And I also liked the moral of the story. I would say that the real moral behind the whole story is there's hope for the future. And I think there are lots of morals in this story, but I think that's like the overcasting one that encompasses the whole story, especially with the ending. It's not just a happy story, though. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of twists and turns and stuff, but I really like the overall moral, which, like I said, is I think it's hope for the future. The ending was also amazing. I can't say enough good things about the ending. You might see the ending coming, but you might not. It's not such a linear story, but it does go over from like the 1920s all the way up to like, I think the 1940s or 50s. But when it starts getting closer, you might start finding out what the ending is, but I don't think you're going to guess it exactly. I will definitely be rereading this book, though. There's nothing in this world that could stop me from rereading this book. I don't know how soon I'll reread it, but it's definitely going to be one that I'm going to be rereading. So, what do I dislike about this book? I would say nothing, and I actually really thought about that. I thought for a little while on what I didn't like about this book, and I can't say really anything bad about it. It's just so beautifully written, and it's just such an amazing story that I really think that most people would enjoy this book. If you're having any doubts, just go off my review and pick this book up and try it out. And I really think that you'll like it a lot. If I was to say one bad thing about this book, it has nothing to do with the story. The only thing I don't like about this book is the actual binding here. It has a matte cover, and if you've read books that have matte covers, which if you read a lot, I'm sure you have, they get fingerprints on them, like they like soak up your fingerprint like the oil on your hands. So after like a couple days of reading it, it gets very disgusting. I wiped it down several times, and I wiped it down right before this video, and it still has a few fingerprints on it here. So that has nothing to do with the story, though. That's really just the book. I mean, you can avoid that probably just by getting it on ebook or something, but don't let that stop you from picking it up. Overall, though, like, yeah, there's nothing I can say like bad about the story. Before I get into who should actually read this, though, I want to ask that if you are not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. And if you are enjoying this review so far, hit the like button and leave a comment below and let me know if you plan on reading this book, or if you have read it, let me know your thoughts on it. So, who should actually read this? I would say everybody. Surprise. Everyone should read this, except for maybe a couple subgroups. If you are uncomfortable with reading a book that's got a few words that you're not familiar with, this is a book based in Russia, so there are some Russian words, but you don't need to really completely understand them. I could skim over them. There's a lot of names that are very hard to pronounce, but not so hard. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing them incorrectly, but they're not so hard to pronounce that you can't like just skip through it, and it's not something that you're really gonna like not understand later on. Like you're not gonna completely forget someone's name or anything like that. And then also, if you don't really like reading lots of different books, you like sticking to one genre, like maybe you really like horror or you like romance, and you don't really like branching out to other books, then this might not be for you. But if you're comfortable trying new books and just picking up something going like blind, and you don't need to know the full story, then this would be an absolute great book for you. Overall, though, I think everyone should at least try to pick this up, except for maybe those like couple small groups. So, like I said, this is definitely like one of my top 10 favorite books. I'm going to be rereading it. But that's all I have to say about it. Pick this book up if you have not read it. I cannot say enough good things about this book. So, thanks for watching the video, and I will see you next time.